You are listening to E-Radio by Missed Apex. We are electric. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the E-Radio Show, brought to you by Missed Apex Podcast. I'm Matt Trumpets, and today's episode is called Arrivederci, Arriva Bene, Let's Go to Rome. I don't know, I just made that up. So let's talk to someone who's actually been there and speaks the language. Buongiorno, Chris C. Stevens.
Ciao, Matt. How's it going?
It's going great. I noticed that you embrace the Italian language a bit more than the Française that you proclaim to hate.
Oh, well, I don't hate the French. How dare you? No, it's all a Doctor Who thing because David Tennant's Doctor used to say "molto bene" a lot, and I like that.
Okay, well, that's an excellent and entirely reasonable justification. So, before we go any further, I am here to remind you that we are an independent podcast hosted by MissedApexPodcast.com, bringing you race reviews, news from the paddock, and tech analysis. This show is safe for work. We are keeping it clean here so you can play this with the kids, in the background, or at work. You can join the live stream in the chat room as well by subscribing to eRadio Show on YouTube, and you'll get a notification when we go live. What say we invite a few people along?
Yes, it sounds excellent.
All right, first up, we have our good friend of the show and ex-FE aficionado, Mr. Anil Parmar. Anil, welcome.
It's great to be here. I can't wait to talk about the 2018 CBMM Niobium Rome E-Prix presented by Mercedes EQ.
I'm sensing you may have an ulterior motive for saying that. But before we get into that, let's say hi to Ryan Ferris. Welcome back, Ryan. How's it going?
It's going brilliant. And unlike Anil, I am not going to give you some long slurry title of a race.
I think you're working in tandem. Anyway, there's an awful lot to talk about, so how's about we get right on into it? Tell us, Chris, what is going on with qualifying? Because, oh my goodness, it seems like all of the things happened there.
Yeah, it was a really bizarre session report I ended up doing. Not least because, two guys didn't make the flag and two guys crashed into each other in the pit lane. I'll start off with the two guys who didn't make the flag. So Jerome D'Ambrosio and Luca Filippi never got their 200 kilowatt laps in. And with D'Ambrosio, it was an odd one because he crossed the line after the flag went out. The team didn't quite realize this and told him to continue. And of course, he was then penalized for, not going into the pits after the checkered flag because he crossed the line twice. And with Felipe, I can only imagine it was a similar error, a misjudgment of the timing.
Right, so from my understanding, this is the first time this has happened in Formula E, and I just wonder if a lot of it was down to the fact that it was a very long lap, because I think it was well over 90 seconds, and normally FE tracks are much shorter. It was amateur hour for the pair of them. I was really surprised. You wouldn't expect to see this type of thing in Season 4.
Well, it happened to Evans in the first round in Hong Kong, quite famously, because he had a shout for pole position. But you're right, very rare instance. I mean, these are top professional teams. This is not the kind of thing you expect to see from them. I think, maybe I'd be surprised if the track length did have something to do with it, because it doesn't take a genius to work it out. And frankly, if they have the world feed on in the garage, and they should do really, and a timing screen, they should have seen the F or the little checkered flag symbol next to D'Ambrosio's name and told him to come into the pits. So really, that's I'm confused by that one, to be honest.
So is it just a case of we think maybe he's been hanging around, Philippi, been hanging around Nick Heidfeld too much?
He doesn't seem to be getting much luck, does he? That would be a real shame. He's inherited Nick's luck. The other incident in qualifying with the two two guys coming together, Da Costa and Lopez. I realize I've put that wrong in the notes. My apologies, Matt. But that was a really weird one. That was a really weird one. And of course, they're right next to each other in the pit lane. And Lopez gets sent out and Da Costa gets sent out, 2 seconds later. Of course, they don't know Lopez is coming. And so they just kind of meet in the middle. And it was very awkward, to say the least.
Yeah, this is one of those things you'd actually expect to happen far more often than it does. I know it looks a bit silly when you see it on TV, but given how small these pit lanes are, and Chris, you were there, you'd see how little space they actually have. You would expect this to happen far more frequently than it does. So I'm not going to go too hard on these two drivers. It's I think what happened to Ambrosio and Felipe on their laps is much worse than this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often. I think it was a rare scenario of these two guys happened to be in the same qualifying group and they were next door neighbors in the pit lane. It was very unfortunate. Fauzi says in the chat room, were Dragon and Neo using the same software as Mercedes in Australia for their qualifying timing mishap?
Early contender for comment of the week right there, I'd have to say.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I should point out, actually. Yes, just to point out, actually, to any listener who's wondering how big these kind of garages are, these aren't permanent structures like you get in, say, Formula One. These are literally tents. So there is not much space in there. Mechanics don't have much space to work around the car. So, as I say, it's strange that this doesn't actually happen more frequently. If it was me running pit garage, it would happen every week.
That's because you'd fill your garage with Nutella. Chris, it looked to me on television like there's really only barely enough room for both cars side by side, with a little extra room for mechanics to stand around and help the driver change. Is that accurate? Does it look smaller in real life than on television?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a bit more space towards the rear of the garage, but of course you need that space more kind of horizontally. And yeah, they are a bit of a tight squeeze in reality.
Yeah, I remember the Paris E-Prix in season 2. I had to interview Mar, who maybe we'll talk about later on, but he was making his debut that weekend. And he was on the other side of his car asking me to come over so I could get a quote for him. And I couldn't get past the car to get to him. So yeah, absolutely no space whatsoever.
And of course, the pit lanes themselves are quite narrow as well. I mean, we've seen guys, especially this season, trying to get out of the garage with full lock on, and they can't make it. So, the whole space is very, very confined.
Well, I tell you what, we've had fun talking about the disasters of qualifying, but were there any unicorns? Did anybody do well? Did we have somebody knocking it out of the park, so to speak?
Andre Lotterer gets the best single sector award of the season. He came into sector 3 in group qualifying 0.3 of a second down, and then by the time he gets to the timing line at the end of the lap, he was top. And that was a bit of a shock, and it got a round of applause from the media center, and rightly so as well. That was a great lap. Of course, it didn't end up going entirely his way in Superpole, because that went the way of Felix Rosenqvist. What a lap. He was 0.6 of a second clear of the field, and it wasn't even a perfect lap. It could have been even quicker. So that was a really stonking lap.
And isn't it the largest gap we've had between first and second in qualifying so far in Formula E?
I believe that's the case. I mean, the spread between first and fifth was actually 1.5 seconds as well. And that's actually one of the reasons why I like the format so much. Because drivers know they're guaranteed a place in the top 5, tend to just push really hard for that one lap. So, it was 0.6 to Bird, but, a second and a half back to Buemi.
Well, Buemi boo-booed his Superpole lap. He probably could have been on the front row had he kept it all together. So I think that's maybe kind of exaggerated that statistic a little bit. But what you say about how, they just go out there and give it 110% because they have, so much less to lose in Superpole. I do really enjoy that format.
Right, and we had 5 different teams in the top 5. So Mahindra with Rosenquist, Bird second, Evans was third, Lotterer fourth, and then you've got Renault in fifth. So again, really competitive series, and even over such a long lap, I guess maybe because it was a new circuit, simulation tools in Formula E aren't maybe as advanced in as other series. It really stopped 1 or 2 teams really kind of dominating. It was great to see 5 different teams in the Super Bowl.
Don't get me started on simulator talk, man. That's all I've been talking about for the last 4 days with these guys.
Why is that?
Shall we talk about simulators then? Let's talk about simulators.
Let's do.
Talking about simulators, I mean, it's the preparation for this event was entirely done on the simulations, and some people will play down the part of the simulator. Others will say they pretty much depend on it because there's so little track and testing time. And if an example Venturi. If you go back to second race of the season in Hong Kong, they've already had a day to work on the setup and fully maximize that car in race 2. That's why Eduardo Motora was so quick in that race and frankly should have won it. But then you go back to the usual format and they're really struggling. And that's because they're struggling to maximize the car. And the simulator isn't quite up to scratch. They've been using very old software, apparently. And they apparently have made big strides in this just before the start of the European season. And apparently, we should be leaning more towards those Hong Kong-esque performances, again, for that team in particular. So that's a little example for you there in the importance of the simulator. Because if you can solve an issue before you even get to the track, that's great. It's way better than turning up in FP1, having an issue that then dictates the entire rest of your day.
Well, this is really very similar to Formula One, isn't in that the teams with the best simulators able to put the driver into the loop show up already way on top of their setup and miles ahead of their competition.
But in Formula One, it's so much more niche, the issues you have, because you have 8 days of testing compared to far fewer days of testing. In Formula E, you only get 3 public days testing, 15 days private for the manufacturers. But of course, the Cheetah don't get that, for example. They only get 3 days of testing. But then you've got 90 minutes in the morning, 90 minutes in the afternoon. You got 3 hours on a Friday, another hour on the Saturday to work on the practice. You get an hour and a half before qualifying in Formula E. That's it. So not even that, an hour and 15. So the issues you have can be so much bigger that you can't solve.
Well, I tell you what, we have an interesting question from the chat room. Maybe you can answer it about the simulator software, or maybe you already did, and I was busy paying attention to my whiskey instead of you, which can occasionally happen, I have to admit. You, American, would like to know, so does each team develop its own simulator software, or is it shared? And I would guess that maybe some develop their own, some modify existing commercial simulators, and some people use third-party products just altogether.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. They all, have their own simulators, and they're all responsible for their own simulators.
I believe the software-wise, most of them use rFactor Pro as their actual simulation, what they use as a simulator.
A little bit deeper into.
I would be very interested to hear what you come up with, because certainly, as we've seen in Formula One, the simulator can have a huge impact on performance, especially across a whole season. So how did we wind up? Who were the top 5 going into the race?
So it was Rosenquist with the Hughes advantage, Bird, Evans, Lotterer, and the Boo Lap Buemi.
All right. Well, I tell you what, how about we get ourselves into some actual racing? Now, I know there was a lot going on in the race, and this is always the point where you tell us where the race was won and lost. But I have to say, it was one of the most interesting moving from the pre-grid to the grid that I have ever seen. How did it wind up being like that? It was like they literally had to drive through. It looked like I was watching The Italian Job or something. They were driving through these tiny little alleys and so on and so forth.
And there were still cars parked in the alleyways, so they're just driving past like regular cars through this alleyway to get to the grid and stuff like that.
Yeah, I did start chuckling when when that happened. I didn't know it was going to happen. It looked really, really dodgy, didn't it?
Yeah, it's strange. There seems to be almost a different solution for the cars getting to the grid at every race, and you kind of turn the TV on and you don't really know what to expect, because sometimes they just do the standard cars already on the grid and they move forward. I think it's 2 grid spots. Is that right, Chris? They currently do. So yeah, they seem to vary it quite a lot. I'm certainly not complaining, but this was it's added an element of like Italian flair to it. I quite liked how different it was.
Well, of course, every city has the unique challenges, doesn't it? On even just putting the circuit and all the infrastructure together. Although that said, I think a normal dummy grid would have worked in this scenario.
You say Italian flair, and I say Italian casual thinking. Perhaps we could leave it there. So, what happened in the race? The start was very eventful. Set us up for the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, because it's such a long lap, we were all thinking that the strategy window was going to be very, very small, like 1 lap. Then and that would be it, because you use up so much more energy in a single lap that you'd have to save so much more to be able to go a lap further.
Right. So at the end of the first lap, I took a look at the energy remaining, and Sam Bird had 92%. So that means he used 8% on that first lap. So immediately I was thinking, wow, they're going to be tight here, because if you put that over a stint, if he was to use 8% a lap, he's going to be doing, well, he needs an extra 4 or 5 laps just to get halfway through the race. So it became quite clear that they were going to be quite limited because of the long lap, but also a long straight into the tightest hairpin. I mean, that was a great start. I quite like the layout of that, because it gave some nice battles throughout the race, but especially down into turn 1.
Yeah, it was a good start. I mean, just on that kind of 8% figure, of course, some of that will have been used going to the grid itself, because that's actually part of your allocation for the race. But also, the first lap tends to be taken a little bit more aggressively while you're battling for position, at least the first sort of half a lap before you then sort of settle into the rhythm. So I think the figure was sort of 6 to 7% per lap. So that is way more than what we normally see. It's usually 3-4% a lap.
I think one of the advantages of it being a longer lap is that you tend to see an opportunity for more kind of energy variance, because I don't know if I've got this the right way in my head, but if it's a shorter lap, everyone tends to kind of follow the same strategy. Whereas, although now I'm thinking about it at the top of my head, I'm actually completely wrong, because if you've got a longer lap, it's harder to save a lap's worth of energy. And Chris, you're about to correct me.
Yes, I mean, I would harken back to Monaco, when you have like the pit stop window is open for like 5 laps because it's such a short lap. Last season's race isn't the best example, because the safety car really ruined that one. But it's the same sort of principle. It's the longer laps you would get a narrower window. As to where the race was won and lost, I really do have to start with Rosenqvist, because he had it in the bag. He was on pole by 6/10, storming away into the distance. There was a little bit of to and fro with the gap to Bird, but he looked pretty comfortable. Pit stop, perfect. Nothing wrong there. And then goes out with the suspension failure. And that's 25 points up out the window, when he stood to gain massively in the championship, with Verne struggling in the lower ends of the points. He was 9th at the end of lap 1.
Well, that's the thing. We've sort of started to see this a bit, and the fact is that when Rosenqvist seems to be put under pressure, that's when he starts to crack, and he really does crack like an egg. In fact, we saw it in the first race of was it Hong Kong? Is it Hong Kong? Oh no, yes. Where he pretty much spun. He started from pole and then spun off at the first corner, and we've started to see sort of little moments of rookie errors.
Well,
I,
I just gotta ask. I mean, it was a broken suspension, so it seemed more like the car itself cracked maybe a little bit under pressure than Rosenqvist. I did note that in the early laps, he managed to clout one of the white part of the curb pretty cleanly, and he was the only car going through. I think it was one of the chicanes, one of the faster ones. He was the only one to actually take a chunk out of that. And I'm wondering if that was also the ultimate cause of his undoing. I don't know if you were able to find that out or
Uh,
not.
didn't they show a replay of him actually hitting the wall from on Bird from Bird?
no, no, he did not. He did not hit the wall. His, it's a weird one. I couldn't say with a significant amount of confidence that he was consistently taking more curb than the others, because usually that wide bit of the curb is not something you want to be on. I mean, I know he may have hit it like once or twice, but in my eyes, that's a mistake, because you're really unsettling the car and you're costing yourself time. I'd be surprised if he was going quicker doing that. So as far as I can tell, it is a suspension failure, a car failure, and not something that Felix did wrong. And he was saying that he was doing nothing unusual on that lap, just the same as he'd been doing all day. And it's more something down to the team. I mean, his two non-scoring finishes, they weren't his fault.
So, this was a driver that he had pegged down as possibly one of the favourites for the championship, given how strong he's been all year, particularly over one lap pace. He had that issue in Mexico, wasn't it, where he had a car failure. He is in a very difficult position now because we're going to next weekend. He needs a win there. If he wants a shot at the title, he now needs to hope that Byrne and Bird have that same misfortune. I do wonder if having Sam Bird behind you, someone who will relentlessly attack and kind of go for broke if he has to. I do wonder if I said he didn't do anything differently on that lap, but I just wonder if all those kind of rides along the curve, because of the need to push so hard because he had Sam Bird behind him, eventually just took its toll on the car.
And I have a follow-up question, since you know all of the things, Chris. Are they all running at this point the same suspension parts? I know they're not going to run the same suspension setup, but initially, and I think back, it must have been the first season, we had that whole rash of suspension failures. Are we down to fully third party, fully their own intellectual property suspension, or is it still basically a spec suspension that they're setting up on their own?
Okay, the setup is most definitely, sort of down to the teams. In terms of what the suspension is actually made of and who the provider is, I believe that is still Dallara and Spark who work on that together. I believe it's still a standard part.
Yeah, I'm just curious because we have noted in the past how well the Mahindra behaves in what seems to be the widest variety of circumstance if they get their setup correct. And I'm just wondering, I think back to the exploding Kevlar tires in Formula One where they were being mounted in the wrong direction and the camber limits were being exceeded. And I just wonder, well, maybe they're just playing with all of the margin of error they're being given by the people providing the suspension in order to get that kind of compliance out of it. And in this case, he did hit that white curb at least once. Maybe it just is maybe it's just a little too far over whatever limits, manufacturer limits their tolerances is the word I'm looking for. They're being meant to play under.
If they are, they're certainly not letting up on it, because I mean, we never really got a definitive answer from Mahindra about sort of what it was, because it just kind of caved in, it just gave up in the middle of that complex. So I think we may have a clearer picture of it when we get to Paris.
Ah, Paris, your favorite city.
Yeah, favorite race of the year. Love that one.
I'm trying to goad you there. The race was interesting to me because it seemed like the pit strategy had a lot more to had wound up playing out a lot more in the second half of the race than it usually does. Which is
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It had a huge impact, and this definitely does go into where the race was won and lost, because you had Evans, Lotterer, and Degrassi closing down Bird, who all stopped a lap later, and were going so much quicker than Bird. And frankly, I am astonished that Bird was able to fend them all off.
Right, and I guess this ties back to what you said earlier, then, Chris, about how if one lap, because it was so long, was worth about 6 to 7% in terms of energy. We've spoken about this before, but there is a trend in Formula E where the first half of races this year, the drivers are very clearly kind of playing the long game because they're thinking about the attack they're going to do in the second. Therefore, you don't tend to see that much action because the driver's priority is to try and get that extra lap, because they know if they can get that lap later on, they can attack significantly more.
Yeah, and I feel that the main changing point in the race, because leading up to the pit stop section, it sort of was a bit dull. Like it sort of seemed like a percent. Everyone changing, and then we had the virtual safety car, but it's not called that in Formula E. I think that is what really changed up the race, and I think the turning point for the race was on the full course yellow.
I would agree with that. I mean, Evans said that the second full course yellow just destroyed his race because it allowed Bird to save a little bit more energy, and that advantage that you have by stopping a lap later starts to shrink, and you get fewer opportunities to overtake. So yeah, full course yellow definitely had something to do with it there. The thing with Evans as well was that once he got that opportunity to get in there and try and overtake, he went way over target on his energy, used far too much, and really paid the price for it on the final lap. He started that final lap in third place and finished it in ninth.
well, that was
Actually, it was better than that. He was second. No, he was third. Excuse. I've just taken a look at the notes, and he was indeed third at the start. So he lost 6 places.
yeah, but he was effectively second on the road when he started losing energy. Was he not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah. Oh yeah.
sorry. And that's what this is the first time I remember seeing someone with an extra lap of energy chasing down someone with one less lap of energy for the lead of the race. And it was apparent to see. But the thing is, coming in that lap later, by conserving the extra energy to get there, he had to use a very big chunk of it just to catch up to Bird. By the time he was really trying to pass, he only had a 2 or 3% advantage on him.
That's the price you pay with the doing that. Like, you lose more time in the first stint by extending that stint, because you have to go slower to maintain the energy for that stint, which you then have to make up. It's about whether you can do that with your energy advantage and save a little bit for the attack later.
Yeah, I quite enjoyed reading the Evans quote I think he did a quote for Formula E where he was just saying that he had his eyes set on the win, so he just got too impatient, and he kind of acknowledged that actually, Formula E is basically a game of chess. You're trying to outsmart the person in front of you, but the racecraft on the day, he admitted it didn't go well for him. He got far too impatient, and actually, even if he couldn't get the win, like, not winning wasn't the end of the world.
I mean, for him, it's his first time fighting for the lead of a race in this category, and for Jaguar as well. So I feel like there was a learning curve there. He was trying to overtake one of the most experienced guys in Formula E, and one of the best guys in Formula E as well at that. In what is a damn good car.
Yeah.
And that is a tall mountain for him to climb.
But it wasn't, I think, ultimately just down to him trying to beat Bird. He was also came under pretty severe pressure from behind. And I think that's ultimately what did him in from an energy point of view.
Yeah, and I feel that where this is what potentially lost Degrassi from winning the race as well. I feel that Degrassi should have played it a bit smarter, because it was obvious that Evans had the pace and that they were pulling away. And then the moment Degrassi started harassing Evans, the pace suddenly dropped. And then next minute they had Lotterer and I believe Abt caught up towards the end as well. I felt that they could have potentially pulled their way forward up to Bird if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, we should keep in mind that Formula E is a team sport, and it's the job of the mechanics and the race engineers to help coach a driver to meet his deltas. So perhaps I'm being a bit too harsh on Evans. Maybe the team were giving him messages and he just kind of said, I'll see what happens when we get to the last lap. But ultimately, it was a team mistake.
No, all it takes is one lap of overconsumption, and that's it. Even by a small margin, and that can wreck the rest of your race. He said just those few corners where he was battling for position with Lotter and Degrassi right behind, tucked up behind Bird as well. Just those few corners where he was pushing a little bit too much, just left him with no energy for the final lap. And those are the kind of like small, the small moments in races where a Bird or a Verne or a Buemi will make the advantage, because they know not to do that. Whereas for Evans, he hasn't been in quite this position yet. So the next time you see him in this position, he will really learn from that.
Yeah, and it's a shame because that would have been their first proper podium. I mean, I know they wound up with one in Hong Kong, but that was after the actual podium had happened. This would have been their inaugural one.
Yeah, first on the podium, which would have been great to see, and God knows they deserve it. They could have been on the podium in every race. These guys, the car is really great, and things keep going wrong for them. I mean, we mentioned it earlier, the timing error in Hong Kong that meant Evans didn't set a lap. Evans has done 2 or 3 races in a row where in qualifying the car's cut out in the middle of his lap and he's ended up way down in the midfield when he should be fighting for pole position. There have been so many other issues. I mean, Piquet in Santiago locked up, threw away a podium. His mistake. That one. It's just something always gets in the way of it. But it's been the case for so many teams. I think you maximize the potential of all these cars. You've got a massive ding-dong battle going on there. But that's the thing of Formula E. It's not necessarily always who's got the quickest car. It's who's maximizing their car the most.
Yeah, I'm just trying not to laugh at Jaguar. Great car, but things keep going wrong. For some reason, that just echoes in my head. I don't know why. But there was a killer battle behind, too. We had Degrassi and Buemi, the old protagonist, at it again.
Yeah, and I'm going to give Lotterer some credit in this one as well, because I feel like his very stern defense really played a part in that, because they're sitting there costing themselves time by battling so much and not catching up to Bird.
Lotterer's experience in racing is really showing this season. Like the speed at which he's become not just much more comfortable in the car, not just in terms of understanding how to push and where to push, but also his actual kind of wheel-to-wheel racing's definitely improved compared to where it was at the beginning of the year. He said after the race that he's still trying to he felt as though he could be more aggressive in the middle stints of races. So I don't know if you kind of got that vibe from him, Chris, or from the race, but it seems like there's still pace there, but at least there was that defense that we saw. We got to see him actually kind of fight other cars again.
The thing about Lotterer is you've got to remember that all of his points have come from 2 races. The podiums that he's scored, Santiago and here. He hasn't actually scored a point in any of the other races. I will totally back you up on saying that he is far, far better than where he was at the beginning of the year. I mean, that was a baptism of fire, his first race in Hong Kong. He's definitely improving. It just doesn't seem to be there consistently. So I guess we'll see in Paris where he ends up. To be fair, he has had occasions where he should have scored points. I mean, he should have scored points in Mexico had he not ran over his mechanic's foot. And gotten a penalty for it. You know, again, there have been other things that have been costing him. But again, you know, he's the headline rookie. Put it that way.
Well,
But it's funny to call him a rookie as well.
Well, no, not really. He was making the same rookie mistake every other rookie has made in Formula E. You know,
But he's also come under fire quite a bit about his defending as well, which I think's brilliant. But like Franchitti was quite vocal about some of his defending that he was doing during the race.
Yeah, my opinion about defending in Formula E is that the cars can clearly take like quite a bit of punishment. So just do what you want. Like if it was another series, I'd probably say it's gone too far, but contact is fine. This is a contact sport. It's like comparing football to rugby, right? Formula E's rugby. I don't care if I see bits of bodywork flying because cars lose bodywork and are clearly capable of going even faster.
I think I counted 4, maybe 5 of the like rear fenders that went flying at any point, and sometimes on the same car. You know, I mean, these. If there was ever a race to kind of prove this point, it was this one.
Yeah, like no one seems to care. It's like, oh, do you have any damage? Yeah, I've lost some carbon fiber. It'll be fine. And then you just kind of hope that the car keeps going. So it was tough, but I think there's kind of an understanding between the drivers of like what you can get away with, especially of course because the tires are protected, so you're not going to drive around with punctures and have to have extra pit stops. It just seems to there seems to be this mentality amongst the drivers of a bit of contact and a bit of pushing through the corners is acceptable.
I mean, Degrassi wasn't complaining after the race, nor during it, so it's fine.
I think one major change we did see when it came to losing part of bodywork was Alex Lynn when he lost part of his front wing, and there was the jump effectively, and everyone goes over nice and smooth, and then his car was all over the place when he went over it.
I did love that jump, and it's interesting because it's not a huge high downforce series like Formula One, so they really can. I've noticed in particular they really like to nose into each other's rear ends, kind of like my cats. It's sort of a strange thing, but it's almost more reminiscent of NASCAR or something like that, where the cars really are used to running together. But I think my favorite. And I wish I could remember who it was, but at one point I think it was Nichols. He literally turned wall into a verb. He's like, "Oh, he's just walled him out of that turn there. That's a little bit naughty." And I thought that was very brilliant indeed. But did you love the jump as well, Chris?
Certainly looked great on television, didn't it?
There was another part talking about being close was during the full course yellow, and I think was it Degrassi behind Verne or Lotterer, and the comment was, I hope that Degrassi hopes that whoever's in front of him doesn't sneeze at this point, or else there's going to be an almighty accident.
I actually missed that bit of commentary. That's hilarious. Going back to the jump, I know we'll talk about the circuit a little bit more later. I do wonder if they could simulate that jump, because there wasn't any talk going into the weekend that could happen, at least from what I saw, but it was brilliant. But what was also great was as soon as on the other side of the jump, the braking zone was really bumpy. So yeah, we need more of that. I love to see that. And, perhaps that bump and that jump perhaps played a part in what happened to Rosenquist.
Perhaps, but the reason why it really stuck out in my mind, it was actually had to do, I think it was Degrassi trying to get round Buemi. And he came up on him and used his fan boost. And again, it's just one of those where you're like, oh, now I understand how that was meant to work all along, because most times it really doesn't play, but it was clear. And you're thinking, oh, it was very reminiscent to me of IndyCar push to pass. And I'm not sure, maybe Chris, you could clue us in what they're thinking about for different strategy options. But I hope some version of that survives into the next season.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, they'll be using different power modes next season. The more powerful one apparently worth a second a lap. So you will see something like that next season.
Yeah, I think fan boost actually worked reasonably well in this race. I can't believe I'm saying this. Normally, the tracks, because they're so small, you don't really see that benefit. And actually, it's better to use fan boost when you're chasing another car and just trying to get a bit closer and use it to set a fastest lap. Or, of course, if you're surrounded by no one, then you just use it essentially as a qualifying tool just to do a good lap in the race. When we have seen fan boost work to lead to an exchange for a race position, I remember Degrassi overtook D'Ambrosio in Mexico a couple of seasons ago, and it drew some criticism. But the reason why it did there was because that wasn't a street track. It was just wide open track, and Degrassi just kind of breezed past, a bit like using DRS in Formula One. It worked here because the size of the circuit and the size of the straights kind of suited a Formula E car better than at, say, I think of a track like Paris that we're going to, where overtaking is very, very tough. It seemed to just work a bit more at this circuit. I'm by no means saying we need fan boost next year, but it did its job.
I mean, everyone will effectively have fan boost next year with the power mode settings, won't they?
Yeah, I felt with that overtake, it was just brilliant because they had the overhead shot of the two, and you're just thinking, Buemi's closing the door. Wait a minute, Degrassi's very close to that wall, and then they had to go through the kink, then the jump, and then just going into the braking zone. You're just thinking, oh, that is just perfect.
Korku and Nomar in the chat room is shocked at you, Anil, for your fan boost compliment.
Hey, I work for the series. I've been ingrained to say certain things. That's why I'm pro the Neobium presented by Mercedes E-Prix malarkey. It's just in my head.
Are you counting votes, were you?
Oh yeah, every 10 that came in. Yeah, absolutely. All 10 votes. I counted them.
But when you started the job, did they just put you in front of a projector screen and like kept your eyes open for like an entire
yeah, definitely. And they had like, hashtag fan boost kind of appearing on this screen. And then I left and I got home. My mum was like, is everything all right? And I would just be like, have you voted yet? Have you voted yet? That was me.
Well, I know a lot of people think the idea of fan boost is shocking, but I'll tell you what's really shocking. We've barely said the name Jean-Eric Vergne.
Yes. This is a good talking point, because the championship leader qualifies in 8th place, is 9th at the end of lap 1, and is set to make a huge loss in the championship with this race. Why he ended up in that position and why he actually pretty much salvaged something pretty good out of it makes for quite interesting reading. Of course, didn't manage to get a 200 kilowatt lap in practice. So that really hurt his qualifying for a start. Didn't get a practice start in either. So lost a place at the start as well. Why he ended up in this position? Both practice sessions ended under red flag conditions. And in the second practice session, they didn't do the practice starts afterwards. They did in the first one, and he didn't go out. Whereas no one got one in for FP2. And he wasn't the only driver to be in that situation. But definitely the combination of no 200 kilowatt lap and no practice start, that was going to be a big hindrance to him.
Right. So what you're saying is he didn't necessarily not have the pace this weekend. It's just that he didn't have the opportunity to dial himself in. And we saw from Rotterdam that the car clearly had pace. But at the end of the day, if your worst weekend of the year, where you have all that kind of misfortune that's not necessarily your fault, if you still finish 5th and pick up a handy bag of points on the same weekend where Rosenquist retires, then I don't think he'll be that disappointed, because it was out of his control. He's not going to sit back and think, oh, what have I done? What have I done? It's more these things happen.
Definitely. I mean, this has been his worst weekend of the season. I got fifth. That's 10 points, and he's really, still got an 18-point lead in the championship. And he was looking at P8 really, inherited the place from Evans. That helped. Oliver Turvey dropping back towards the sort of pit stop phase as well helped as well. Buemi struggling in that second car as well did help him. So I think he's lucked into a couple of places there. But take it where you can get him.
Right, so it was a relatively good weekend for Vern. But what about Buemi? Because his pace seemed to be up and down throughout the race. And he said after the race, I think it was to Sam Smith at E-Racing, that he didn't really understand the pace of the second car, and that maybe there was some kind of regeneration problem. I still almost assume that when I tune into Formula E, Buemi is about to kind of take pole, and he's either going to bin it or win it. So what exactly was the problem, Chris, this weekend with him, especially in that second car?
Right. Well, the thing is, Buemi coming out and saying, "I don't know where our pace has gone," is something I've heard at every race this year, and it goes back. It goes back to preseason testing. They went in a direction was set up that was wrong, and I'll go back to what I was saying earlier about the limited track time that you have to solve that issue. They haven't been able to find the solution to it yet. They've been able to kind of minimize the problem and maybe get something better out of it at certain races. Punta del Este was one of them, but Buemi flung it at the wall and didn't manage to reap the rewards of that. Perhaps here in Rome, they probably are still struggling with it. Yeah, Buemi could have been on the front row, and he would have had a better race out of that as well. If they're still having these handling issues, it wouldn't surprise me at all. So I'm not sold on a regeneration issue just yet. I feel like that kind of issue would have been a bit more apparent to him and the team at the time. So I guess we'll wait. We'll wait for answers on that one. But things that this is nothing new to me. The Edams have been struggling all season.
Right. Well, at least he beat his teammate by 50-odd seconds, but I don't think that surprises any of us anymore, does it?
Well, I was talking to Jean-Paul Drio, and not both of those drivers are secure for next season.
Wait a minute.
Not both. Right, okay. That's
the lineup. The lineup may change.
Right. So do you get any inkling as to which of those two drivers is more likely to be ushered away?
I'll leave that. Well, just ask yourself, who would you rather have in that team, Buemi or Prost?
Yeah, but doesn't Prost have some connection there? His father.
Not next season, because Alain is focusing on Formula One as of next season. Now that Renault are pulling out.
So what you're suggesting is that if Daniel Ricciardo moves on and Carlos Sainz goes to Red Bull, then the vacant seat at the Renault F1 team will go to Nico Prost. Chris Stevens, you brilliant investigator.
I thought, and the Formula E seat will be taken by Jan Mardenborough as it's turning into Nissan next season, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been looking at sort of Nissan Nismo's lineup. Nobody's really jumping out at me, to be honest. But I must stress, and I wanted to get clarification from Jean-Paul, which was the contracts that the drivers have are with the team at EDAMS and not the backing manufacturer.
And on that note, shall we move on to any other business, or do you want to tell us what actually happened at the end first?
No, I think we all know. Bird pulled off a stunning victory, really, and great podiums for Degrassi and Lotterer, and Vern 18 points clear in the championship. Rosenqvist is now 37 points behind. He's a mid. He needs to outscore both of them every single round for the rest of the. Because I asked him about the pre-race, and he said 30 points is nothing. That's 5 points a race, and all it takes is Vern to have 1 week race and for me to win it. And he had that. It was handed to him. And it's not worked out,
Oh, well, to be fair,
We
now
don't
it's
know
only 8 points a race. I mean, we're not even up to double digits a race yet. How bad could it
No.
possibly be?
No, this is true. I think this championship is still open between these three. But Bird has properly pulled himself back into championship contention now.
No, I think the issue really is one that Techeetah seems to have solved reliability in a way that nobody else has.
Oh, okay. Well, we know they had this setup breakthrough in the post Marrakesh test that's really just launched their season off. Because you think about where they were in the first 2 races, it wasn't nowhere near where they are now. And I'm glad you bring up reliability, because DS Virgin were the ones having all these gearbox issues that magically got cured in Mexico when they changed the gearbox. And, Alex Lynn did confirm to me, yes, there was a problem with the gearbox. Won't tell me what it was. But, there was definitely something holding them back in those first few races. But you think Bird won a race in Hong Kong, almost won the race in Marrakesh, with those gearbox issues. Imagine where they'd have been.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing about Formula E that's always been a little bit fun, is that the reliability is more like old Formula One reliability, in that you could go out there and think everything's fine, and then your battery management system says, nope, not going to finish this race, too bad. But Techeetah have, and maybe I'm cursing them, Techeetah have yet to experience that. And I wonder if being a customer team has caused them to focus more on that as a strategy.
Well, one thing that I find interesting, that not only that once again both Cheetah cars have beaten the factory team, but another point towards the end of the race is that to do with the battle for second position, and that you didn't really gauge how much they were tripping each other up until, with 5 laps to go, they said, Daniel Abt is 6 seconds down the road. There's no way he's going to catch this group. And then on the last lap, who's at the back of the tail? It's Daniel Abt. So, with 5 laps to go, and Abt closes that 6 seconds up to put himself in the contention,
On your reliability point, of course, the Cheetah don't have to worry about the powertrain, do they? They just get it off Renault. There's nothing they can do in that area. They can put so much more focus into their side of things, the operational side of things, everything they can do to make things better. And Mark Preston was telling me, all these things that they've been able to do. And you get the idea that Preston's a real strategy thinker. He's a real problem finder, and he gets solutions. And he does it so well, and that's what's really brought them up the field. Actually, Corku's brought up a good point that we haven't really addressed, which is we have these 3 going for the championship, but Degrassi, and actually I'm going to throw in so many other names here, but there will be so many drivers that will be a key part of the drivers' championship and will spoil races for others, take points away from them because the series is so competitive.
Right. Even though the championship may involve like 3 drivers, plenty more drivers will compete for podiums, and that's what makes it really exciting. And if we go to Super Pole and you've got Vern going up against Bird, you've got someone like Degrassi in that session as well, who has nothing to lose. It's going to put the leaders under a lot of pressure. One thing about Sam Bird, I know we want to talk about some of the other teams in any other business, but he's brilliant to watch, and he could have won more races than he has. But he delivers under pressure. You think back to New York last year, I think he won both races, if my memory's correct. That's a huge asset. They know they're good around there. Circuit's slightly different for this year, but they will feel very confident going into the rest of these races because he's quick, he knows the car well, and not only is he consistently good at overtaking and his race trim, but his 1-lap performance is pretty handy too.
Sounds like all the qualities of Jean-Eric Verne and Felix Rosenqvist as well, doesn't it? This is going to be a fantastic championship fight, isn't it? So yes, on to any other business. Driver of the day goes to Jerome D'Ambrosio. 7th from 18th on the grid because he stopped 2 laps later than the leaders. How on earth he managed to eke that out? I have no idea, but he was so quick at the end of the race because of it.
So that means that altogether we had like a 3-lap pit window, because weren't there some people who there was one person who stopped a lap early?
More 4-lap window of the race you'd least expected it, because Da Costa came in a lap early. Now that I've mentioned Da Costa, I'll mention him as well, because he was starting at the back from the pit lane collision. He just had a super aggressive first stint, just charged his way up the field. He was up into P11 by like lap 10, and he was storming through. But of course, had to stop a lap early because he was making those big gains. And then, fell back towards the end of the race. So he's just missed the point. 11th, he's just missed the points again for 2 races in a row. Venturi, they scored double points, but they're still behind target for me. Mortara should have been a bit further up the grid, I think, but he knocked the wall in qualifying, and also ended the race with no rear wing. Which wasn't good for him. I think it was contact with Lopez, if memory serves me correctly, but it wasn't actually caught on the world feed at the time. I see you're all raising your hands at me, so please do jump in, Anil.
Well, I hope I'm not treading on what Ryan was about to say, but we had that brilliant pile-up of like 4 cars. Oh, sorry, Ryan. I could tell by your reaction
that was my next point as well.
Okay, that pile-up was brilliant because it was 2 cars. And then the camera zoomed out, and then a few more just joined in. And we haven't seen that too often in the series. And I did think, actually, if they weren't able to get away, we might actually end up in a situation with a red flag or a safety car. But it seemed to kind of semi-resolve itself fairly quickly.
It was very much a Long Beach moment, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it does give us a chance to play a nice game of whose fault is this?
Well, let's then. Ryan, you saw it. Whose fault was that disastrously entertaining pileup at the hairpin?
I can't remember who was involved. I can't remember off the top of my head.
So it was Lopez going up the inside of Turvey and Heidfeld, and then Felipe and Mortara went into the back of them.
Well, it was almost like 2 separate incidents, really, because the instant was sort of over, and then they're just sort of all thinking, well, we're going to pull away, and next minute the others just come in for seconds. But no, I reckon it's got to be Lopez.
Yeah, so the second part of the incident, which I think was kind of Felipe, it was Felipe, wasn't? Oh, Chris, do you want to just correct me on that? It was Felipe, wasn't it?
Yeah, Felipe and Mortara.
Right, so yeah, the second part of that incident I just thought was fantastic. Felipe just thinking, oh, join in here. There's space up the inside, but no, let's just see what happens if I ram him. I thought it was great. I'm not driving the car. As Ryan says, it's 2 separate incidents. But Felipe for that first one, even though there were probably already yellow flags out, I just thought it was absolutely brilliant.
I mean, Felipe isn't driving the car in Paris, so he may as well knock it up a little bit. It's almost karma for what Martin Quard did to what became Esteban Gutierrez's car last season. Yeah, for me, Lopez. I mean, it was a really ambitious move up the inside of 2 cars and just tagged Turvey, really. For me, the wrong cars were investigated. And I would say, I'd say it's a racing incident, but the fact that Lopez wasn't involved in that list of drivers being investigated was surprising to me.
Speaking of investigation, there was a post-race investigation I saw with Degrassi, and I didn't quite catch what was going on.
Okay.
I know we had that incident a few races ago with the fireproof underwear. He bought some Calvin Kleins instead of some Hugo Bosses, and he got in some trouble. This race, it was to do with him buckling up inappropriately. So can you just explain what trouble he was causing? Because it kind of flew over my head.
Context for this race, given all of the sort of pit stop issues that have been seen since the abandonment of the minimum pit stop time, there are now CCTV cameras placed above the second car. They look straight down at the car so that every single car swap is monitored, and they can see what exactly is going on in each pit stop. In Degrassi's case, the view of the crotch belt being done up. So that's the one that goes up between the legs. That view was blocked, so they couldn't see what was going on. So the investigation was merely double checking that everything was done appropriately, especially seeing because I think he gained a place during the pit stop as well. So I think they just wanted to double check. They got the team to kind of reenact their procedure, which is a bit of a weak way of going about things. But really, it's the only option you got. And in the end, they've got no proof that any crime was committed, so he was let off free of charge.
Well,
Whether they actually did anything wrong in that pit stop or not, we'll never know.
but interestingly, Nelson Piquet did have a bit of a problem there, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he was having a terrible day anyway, really, wasn't he? But seatbelt issue, he was not impressed. Very monosyllabic, single word answers. Just so it was a seatbelt issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was his response.
That's a driver having a good time. Well, I'll tell you what, you're all wrong about my favorite driver, Pachito Lopez. There is no way anything is ever his fault, ever. He made it up the inside. He made it cleanly yet. And
No, he didn't.
yeah, he did. He was clearly
He had,
on the
a
inside.
wheel alongside him.
Yeah, he was totally up the inside, fair as fair can be. Turvey should have thought better of it and not tried to keep his foot in it. That's what I say.
I mean, did you think Max Verstappen did nothing wrong at the weekend?
I'd say that's debatable.
No, I just thought from that standpoint. I was just going to quickly run in my last point of any other business. Alex Lynn, complete nightmare of a day. Both of those red flags we saw in free practice were caused by him, and then rear-ended John-Eric Verne at the start of the race. Black and orange flag to get the front wing changed. So then that ruined his race. And then finally, he retired with a technical problem.
Yeah, I almost feel like when a driver gets a technical problem after having a terrible weekend, they can almost use it as a bit of a scapegoat. Because on the results that will show up as a DNF, as opposed to, they were just very poor, it always looks bad when your teammate is outperforming you to such a degree. Very tough weekend for him.
Yeah, it was, and not, but that's going to happen. But it was very brutal. I think the first lap thing just really put him off his feed, and there was not really going to be a great recovery from that. Even though at least he didn't lose a lap because the lap was so long, which normally isn't the case in Formula E. I see that someone wants to talk about the TV and the naming. Is that you, Anil?
I thought the race direction in this race was surprisingly poor. And I know it's easy to criticize it, racing race direction, because you've got so many camera angles, you have so many shots, and I imagine the race director has so many people around him trying to decide what gets shown on television or not, but seemed to miss quite a few battles, missed Degrassi's kind of scrappy fights, and when Rosenquist retired, it took them a long time to really show what had actually gone wrong, or at least tried to provide any kind of different camera angles. And I was actually on the Formula E Reddit group earlier, and once again, there was a very large thread there of people just saying, yeah, it was bad. And then again, maybe I'm just over exaggerating it. It's a long lap as well, so which adds a degree of if you're dealing with a lap that's 60 seconds long, it's not going to be that bad.
Yeah, and I felt that there was quite a few camera angles where they've pretty much just caught the cameraman at the wrong point whilst he's trying to pan round for another shot. And usually it makes you think, oh, there's been an accident with the camera going around. Oh, no, wait, it's just the cameraman doing his job and swiveling around. He's been picked on at the wrong point.
The thing about this race is that you had a lot going on at the same time. I mean, at the exact same moment Rosenquist retired, that whole podium battle, really kicked into high gear. As well. And, you can't focus on two things at once. And really the thing with, Rosenquist not getting the, not getting the airtime after the incident is because there isn't really anything to show. There was nothing. He didn't hit a wall. He was just driving along and then clunk.
Talking about airtime, one thing that I did like camera-wise was the like ground level shot that they had of the jump, and it was sort of very reminiscent, or sort of reminded me of the shot of back in the 60s of Graham Hill at the Green Hell going over the jump. I don't know if anyone else thought about that.
It was a really good camera shot, actually. I think they actually kind of put a gif of it on the Formula E Twitter feed. I thought it was amazing. Hopefully they do more stuff like that, because it was definitely one of the better kind of camera shots across the calendar, at least from what I can recall.
I mean, I think the whole circuit and venue was really great. They did a fantastic job, and learning that Rome was the first city that Formula E wanted on its calendar, and the mayor at the time kind of said no. And the new mayor, Virginia Raggi, she's all for it. She loves it, and I am really, really happy that is the case, because we're looking at, according to Sam Smith, a 5-year deal for this race, and that is unheard of in Formula E. Like, a circuit hasn't even lasted 3 years, let alone 5. And there's already signs up saying "See you in 2019." You don't get that at other Formula E races.
I need to just lay my cards out here. Rome is my favorite city in the world. I adore it. Not just for the history, but I love food. The food there is amazing as well. So the idea of kind of having an electric race there that's permanently on the calendar, I think it's absolutely necessary. People talk about how London needs to be on the calendar, but for me, Rome is just that. There's something about it, and the circuit. And Chris, maybe you will have noticed this from your time there, but one issue Formula E has when it builds a circuit, particularly a long one like this, is the interruption it can cause to people there. People aren't so happy, but they seem to choose the right location. And I know a lot of their promo had it, here's the Colosseum, here's the Roman Forum. Actually, it was on another part of town where in EUR. And the location just seemed to work. The circuit was wide at times, but it was also narrow where it had to be. You had elevation change. We spoke about this about Montreal last year. This is a good thing. Like, I want to see Formula E cars airborne all the time. That's what I want to see. So if they can get this as a permanent fixture on the calendar, I'm very happy.
And it was a sellout event. A sellout event.
They had to put extra grandstands up as well to try and accommodate everyone.
And even where there weren't grandstands, people were lining the banks along the circuit.
Another thing was the fact that, like, they obviously, you were saying about the Colosseum and everything, that the circuit was actually 10 miles, or approximately 10 miles away from where the Colosseum was. But talking about that downhill section, like the shot of them just going down this sort of S-style section downhill was just brilliant, and it just was one of these circuits that was just brilliant to look at, because even though it's a business region of Rome, like, the architecture is still pretty appealing.
Yeah, you had a fantastic mix of the skyscraper, the modern skyscrapers, the classic ancient Italian architecture, and the green fields alongside as well. Just a brilliant set. Beautiful. Bene, molto bene.
And the petrol station on the corner, says the chat room.
Yeah, that was, I love it. What a brilliant place for a starting grid.
All right, well, if there's nothing else, perhaps it's time to visit the podium. All right, Anil, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who or what was your thing of the weekend?
I'm going to give it to the circuit. I was going to give it to Bird, but no, it's the circuit. And I'm saying that because I know Chris was about to say it, so I'm enjoying his rage. Sorry, Chris.
All right, well, I'll take advantage of that and put Ryan up next so he has a chance to recover himself.
Oh, I don't know. There's two. This is a tough one because I've got two things on my head. But the other one, the one that I'm thinking of, is the fact that Formula E got into the mainstream universe of memes over the weekend with the shot of the Pope looking over the Formula E car, and that made into so many different memes.
All right, Stevens, give us the scoop. What or who was your thing?
my thing of the weekend was Max Biaggi, motorcycle racing legend, driving the Formula E car on Friday.
Yeah, and I think the thing to go with that was the fact that, I think the organisers have gone, we've had enough of having actors go out in the car and crash it all the time. Let's just take something from the racing background. Maybe he might not crash this time.
All right. As for me, I got to say that the jump was my favorite thing of the weekend. I mean, boy, there was a lot to choose from. Sam Bird would certainly deserve it as well. But that jump, watching the cars leave the ground, was such a throwback moment. And I think because, in all honesty, unlike Formula One with its sparks, I think it was authentic. I don't think they knew that was going to happen till they got there. And so they didn't just plan it that way to make it look like that. That's what really made it work for me. All right, Stevens, who missed the apex?
The Dragon and Neo teams for their shortcomings in qualifying.
Anil, who missed the apex?
I was going to bring that one up. So, Chris, you've got your revenge by stealing mine. So, I'm going to go for Lynn. Just poor all week. Well, I say all week, all day.
Oh, I don't know about that one. He did have a pretty good start.
All right, then.
Okay. You pick one aspect. You pick one aspect to cover.
He had a pretty good start. He ran directly into the back of Vern. Are you kidding me?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I've had a mind blank. I'm thinking of Turvey when he went around the outside at the hairpin.
Why do we invite you on again? Remind me of this. Okay, Ryan, redeem yourself. Who missed the apex for you?
I'm going to have to say it's the Renault team, by the fact that once again, both drivers have been beaten by both customer car drivers.
I think that's an absolutely positively fair shot. For me, the missed apex award has to go to Prost. It just like not doing anything for me at this point. I don't know. At least there were times in the past where he was kind of sort of on it a little bit. And just man, it's the only thing that could possibly be worse, Chris, would be if somebody like Ma Ching-hua was coming back.
Oh, I mean, let's wrap this up quickly because I know we're short on time, and frankly, I can't get my head around it. But I think the kind of theory is that Neo's Chinese team probably under a bit of pressure to get a Chinese driver in at some point. So I don't think this is going to be a change for the rest of the season. I think this is a one-off. Get Ma Ching-hua some exposure time, and then Felipe will be back. And because I think it'd be extremely harsh on Felipe. Rookies struggle in this series. This is the nature of the beast. Formerly such a technically different sport or championship series compared to anything else any of these guys have ever driven. And just throwing them under the bus like that, I think it's I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right. And Mars had a couple of opportunities to prove himself, and he hasn't. Felipe should get the end of this season.
But it's just a bit mind blown to the fact that they've probably chosen the slowest person in Formula E history. He was the only person that I can think of that was getting lapped multiple times, not because he had a problem with the car, just the fact that he was slow. And to be honest, he hasn't really got a career record of single-seater racing. He's pretty much just done like Chinese or Asian touring cars, and then just pretty much come into Formula E out of nowhere.
He won a race in the Moscow Raceway in some series that I don't even know.
Well,
and there we go. He won a race. The Chinese national anthem played for him. So you take that back, Ryan.
Well, I will say I certainly hope that he has a better time of it than the last time we saw him in the series. I hope that he's able to be competitive just for the sake of the sport. But the reality of all motorsport is it is expensive, and you got to get your money where you get your money. And clearly a lot of marketing and that sort of thing must revolve around it, or else they wouldn't have done it. because he certainly, as you said, his previous venture through the sport wouldn't recommend him to be replacing somebody because he wasn't doing as well as Philippi has been doing, as bad a luck as he's been having.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look at all the rookies this season have been struggling. Lynn's really, been great, but has been struggling. Lotterer, he's been struggling. Blomqvist, been having a nightmare. These guys are all fantastic racing drivers.
Yeah.
But Formula E is so difficult in a way that you just kind of cannot express it really in such a different way to, something like Formula One or really, anything.
Yes.
In motorsport. But frankly, they should be forgiven, given a bit more leeway.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that Turvey, again, is a very experienced guy in Formula E.
Yeah. Well, and it's also a thing, just wrapping up this point, that they're now against drivers who have lots and lots of experience in these cars. So they look worse relative to the first couple of seasons where everybody was having to figure it all out. But Chris, you have said you were in charge of comment of the week. Do you indeed have a comment of the week?
Right. So we have Fauzi were Dragon and Neo using the same software as Mercedes in Australia in reference to them missing the timing line in qualifying. You American, Jaguar, great car. Things keep going wrong. That's been their tagline since the XJS. And Korku and Noma, I'm in shock that Anil said something positive about Fan Boost. I think we'll give it to you American on this one for the Jaguar comment.
I concur. Congratulations, you American. You have won Comment of the Week.
Comment of the week.
I love having a soundboard. It is so much fun. All right, Ryan Ferret Ferris, where can we find you on the internet? What are you doing?
You can find me on Twitter at Ferret115. That is IT, not ET. And you can also find me on Instagram, same handle, where I post pictures of motorsport and car-related events that I've been to.
Wonderful. Anil, where can we find you? What are you up to?
You can find me on Twitter at AnilP228. Always up for talking about Formula One and Formula E, so give me a follow.
Please do. And Chris, tell us, what are your particulars?
You can find me on Twitter at cstevens_journo. Most of my written work is at formulaspy.com, occasionally on Autosport and Motorsport.com as well. And I will plug a little thing I wrote about the Rome E-Prix event and why I thought it was so spectacular. And I put that on my own personal website, chrisstevensjourno.wordpress.com.
Oh my goodness, your own personal website. Well, I tell you what, do give Chris a follow if you haven't, because he is attending all of the next several mini Formula E races, and he's more than happy to answer your questions in real time on the Twitters. And speaking of the Twitters, you can find me at MattPT55 on the Twitters. Do give me a follow if you care to. At least some of the things I talk about might be tangentially related to what you're interested in. And most importantly, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at eRadio Show. And remember, chicks dig heels, wounds cause scars, and glory is a fungible concept under certain philosophical precepts. This has been eRadio Show.